Well, for the last time in this role, it's, let's just say, Lynn, no guns today.
Well, good morning. That's a bittersweet comment. This is one of my favorite things to do, and I know I say that at various different conferences, but every one of them has a different character and a different nature, and this is the best conference in the North American continent. I'm so glad to be with you this morning. I get to talk about the path forward, and that's an amazing topic if you think about it. But I want to start with a story. I had the chance to tell a story last night, sort of about myself, about why I am so optimistic. But I'm going to tell a little different story this morning. 9 years ago, I was in Washington, D.C. for an Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission meeting, and a young man who had come to this country from Germany and was living in Hershey, Pennsylvania, asked if he could come down and have dinner with me. What he wanted to talk about was marrying my daughter. And of course, my first question was, do you plan to take my daughter back to Germany? And I love his answer, and it's one of the reasons I'm so optimistic about what you're doing and about this country. He said, not a chance. This country is the only place on the planet where you can be an entrepreneur. And he had come here, so yeah, congratulate yourself. He grew up in the GDR, and the wall didn't come down until he was 6 years old. His father was close to getting his doctorate degree under the German Democratic Republic, and it was anything but democratic and anything but a republic. But when the wall came down, the school closed, and there was no doctorate degree. So he found a job working in a shoe factory, managing a shoe factory, and they made cheap shoes for the Russians. But when the wall came down, there was no market for their shoes. And so he had to go back to school and get an engineering degree in West Germany, and he now runs the engineering registration organization for the entire United Germany. But Sebastian followed my daughter to this country, and he got a job at a research hospital. He's a biomedical engineer, and he met some Americans there, one of which is a Chinese American, by the way, and an entrepreneur, and he came to this country for the very same reason. And they've got 3 startup companies, and they are doing fantastic in the MRI business. And so, why am I optimistic? This is really the only place on the planet where an entrepreneur can innovate and come up with an idea and make all of our lives better. And North Dakota, I believe, is the best place for any of that. Sebastian's in Texas. That might be second best. But I think North Dakota is the best place to be located if you believe in this country. So let's talk a little bit about the path forward. If we're going to do that, we got to start with a little bit of where we've been and where we are. The last time we got together was in 2021, and so you can see where we were at in 2021. We were just coming out of the COVID pandemic, and you can see that we had about 16,000 wells producing in the state. We had 15 rigs running, and we were happy to still have 15 rigs running at that point in time. We had gotten down below 10 at one point in time, and we thought we were going to drill 65,000 more wells because everything was spaced on 2-mile laterals, and that was the idea going forward, which meant we still had about 46,000 wells to drill. At that point in time, we had produced 3.8 billion barrels of oil, which is pretty good. But today we're celebrating, just a few years later, 5 billion barrels of oil out of the Bakken, and we'll talk in a minute about what that means on another slide. And we'll talk a little bit about another billion number that I want to talk about. So where are we? Well, we're right at 40 drilling rigs. The amazing thing is that those 40 drilling rigs are capable of drilling just as much footage as 218 rigs did in the peak of the boom in 2012. What you have done is absolutely incredible, incredible. We have a much lower number in the inactive well count. We have a much higher number in the active well count. You can see that we've stabilized our legacy assets or our conventional assets, and we're converting those to enhanced oil recovery. And the DUC wells are virtually non-existent. We just have an inventory to work off of for the frac crews. We are in a much healthier place. What's really amazing to me is through your innovation with things like the switchback wells and the 3-mile laterals and now the talk of 4 and 5-mile laterals, we've reduced that surface impact from 65,000 potential wells down to 40,000 potential wells ultimately for the same amount of ultimate recovery. What you do on a day-to-day basis absolutely amazes me. So let's use a little analogy, race car analogy, shall we? Bakken now, I think right now, we're kind of in first and second gear. We're still coming out of that pandemic situation, and everybody's talking about 1 or 2% growth. We think the path forward is an acceleration of that. The talks that I have heard over the last couple of days about enhanced oil recovery and the new methods for getting more oil out of the rock that is between your wells and between your spacing units and at the toes of your wells and the heels of your wells, there's just so much focus on enhancing the amount of oil that we recover from the existing spacing units that it is mind-boggling even to an old guy like me. And so we're looking forward to an upshift. We absolutely don't want to go back, all right? So we've taken reverse out of our transmission. That's not a direction that we ever want to go. I'm borrowing some information from the data analysis dude we call Justin Dad, or the data analysis dude, and he's constantly evaluating our data that we collect at the Industrial Commission and helping us look at that going forward. And I love how engineers always draw these nice straight lines, don't you? Nice, smooth, straight lines. They're so beautiful. Well, there's a part of this curve that we are not interested in, and that's the reverse part of the curve. And you can see we've marked it out down there. But what we know is that we need 90 to 100 completions a month in order to move North Dakota forward into the 21st century in terms of oil and gas production. So we've got to be permitting between 90 and 100 wells a month to stay ahead of you. You need to be drilling and completing between 90 and 100 wells a month. And I put this curve in front of my permitting crew now on about a weekly basis because we know that it's a struggle. We understand that with the implementation of North Star and all of that, that we have struggled to get back up to that number. But we've met that number the last few weeks. And so we are promising you that the Industrial Commission, the Oil and Gas Division, knows how to get this done, and that we are capable of permitting that 90 to 100 wells a month, giving you a one-year inventory so that you can move forward. The interesting thing is that, you know, we draw these nice smooth lines and we think this is the path forward, but kind of look at the history. There's no way to know what's coming around the bend, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But who would have predicted, you know, a price war like we had in 14 and 15? Nobody would have predicted a worldwide pandemic like we had in 20. Or what about those awesome blizzards that we've had the last couple of years that kind of took the wind out of our sails briefly? And so what you've done to climb back up to 1.2, 1.3 million barrels a day is an awesome testimony to what you are all about and what you're capable of. What that path forward, though, means is take a look at this. So if we do 90 to 100 completions a month, our oil production has a nice, healthy growth curve, but our gas production absolutely goes over the moon. And so we need to talk about that. I said I would talk about another number. We're celebrating 5 billion barrels of crude oil this week. What we haven't talked a lot about is what you've done in the gas capture world. At the same time that we produced 5 billion barrels of crude oil, you have captured and processed and produced 2 billion barrels of natural gas liquids. Ethane and propane and butane, the things that your daily life are made of. If you check into a hospital, virtually everything around you is going to be built from ethane and propane. And so what you've done is not just 5 billion barrels of crude oil, but 2 billion barrels of natural gas liquids. And they said it couldn't be done. They said in 2014, you'll never get your flaring under control. But like you always have done, Ron and I took a ride in a Suburban. We had shotguns with us, but we weren't aiming them at each other. And we had a chat about what needed to get done. Well, some of your folks had come up with this innovative concept called a gas capture plan. And they had put that in front of me, and I talked to Ron about it, and he said, I think we can make that work industry-wide. And we did that. You guys said, we're going to do gas capture plans with every permit. And we said, we'll back that up with a rule. We'll make sure everybody does a gas capture plan. Not just the innovators and the geniuses that came up with the idea, but everybody gets to do a gas capture plan. You solved the problem. You went from 36% flaring down to 2%. And you produced 2 billion barrels of natural gas liquids that have gone into the American economy. Talk about energy security. Talk about national security. What an amazing thing to produce so much natural gas liquids that there's unlimited amount of plastic for us to use in our daily lives. That wasn't the only problem that you solved, and we'll talk about more of them later. So looking forward a little bit, this presents maybe some future challenges. You have solved part of the problem there. We're today celebrating that 5 billion barrels of oil, and one of the necessary solutions to get to 7 billion barrels of oil started operation this year. WBI reversed their Grasslands pipeline, and you now have natural gas going to the Cheyenne hub and working its way towards Mexico and California, where Californians don't want it, but they got to have it, okay? They just need to face reality. And so you've solved part of the problem through gathering expansion, processing expansion, export pipeline expansion, and NGL pipeline expansion. Over $30 billion invested in that infrastructure. $30 billion to go, by the way, but over $30 billion invested in that infrastructure. But what's that 5 billion barrel number mean? You have invested somewhere in the range of $250 billion in my home. You've created 66,000 full-time jobs for my family and fellow citizens. You have generated a $9 billion legacy fund for the future generations. You have generated a $6 billion Common Schools Trust Fund for K-12 education going into the future. You pay 52% of all state revenues. That's absolutely astounding what has happened with that 5 billion barrels. Give yourself a round of applause. You know, they said it couldn't be done when they were producing unconventional gas. They said, well, you'll never be able to get oil out of unconventional formations. It just won't flow like gas. Can't happen. But you proved that you could drill horizontal wells and hydraulically fracture them and make unconventional oil work. And you heard that story in the video of the pioneers and the entrepreneurs and the visionaries that made that happen. Then they turned around and said, through a movie called Gasland, they said, well, you can't possibly drill all those horizontal wells and frack them without setting the prairie on fire. But you proved it could be done. They said, you'll never get your flaring under control, and we already talked about that. But you did. They said, you know what? You can't ship your oil by rail, but you proved that you could condition your oil and send as much oil as needed by this country over the rails to the places that needed it, and said they didn't want it, but we had to beat them down policy-wise and make them take our oil, which they desperately needed to keep their refineries running, and they said you couldn't do it. They said you couldn't build a pipeline from Stanley, North Dakota to the Gulf Coast, and that you couldn't export your oil to the world who so desperately needed it. But through sheer tenacity, You built that pipeline, crossing the Missouri River twice, and you went to Washington, D.C., and I don't know, Harold can tell you how many hundred meetings it took, but you convinced Congress and the President to get rid of the export ban, and you changed the world. They said it couldn't be done, but you've done it. You are innovators and problem solvers like nowhere else on the planet. And you're gathered here today in my home in North Dakota to continue to innovate and solve problems. You risked your capital. You built a 21st century North Dakota that has a different population trajectory and a different demographic trajectory than anybody could have imagined before the year 2000. Yeah, they said it couldn't be done, but you are problem solvers. So the first problem you solved on the natural gas to get us to the 7 billion barrels, you can see over there, the Grassland South project. The next one to come, which will get us to that 9 billion barrel mark, is the reversal of and the Bakken Express project. Thanks to the federal government, an existing pipeline is going to take 4 years to permit through the FERC. An existing pipeline, because it needs a couple of compressors and the valves turned around. It's absolutely astounding to me how resistant our government is to progress. But that will get us to 9 billion barrels of oil. That next billion to get us to 10 is a bit more challenging. And so what are we going to have to do? Well, we got to continue to expand gathering and processing, but we need to move to electric generation, which you're doing, enhanced oil recovery. So enhanced oil recovery, about 10% of the Bakken could be processed if we took all that natural gas. We need storage, so we're working on salt cavern storage and funding that. We need to turn gas into liquids. We need to make fertilizer. We need to make hydrogen, and we need a petrochemical industry. That's going to be a bit challenging, isn't it? But the problem solvers and the innovators know how to make that happen. So let's talk a little bit about following that. So that gets us to 10 billion barrels of oil, but the sad news is if we stop there, we go into what's called terminal decline. That's not a path forward for this industry. So at that point in the mid-30s to late 30s, there's no more wells to drill. There's no more gas capacity to expand and turn into prosperity in our backyard. And so we could go into terminal decline, and we could end up with 20 billion barrels produced out of the Bakken resource. The future lies in enhanced oil recovery. And I talked to my assistant director who ran that group yesterday, that discussion group. He said he had to shut them down because the questions just kept coming and coming and coming. The problem solvers are thinking about how to solve this problem and how to make this work. So we've got a successful CO2 enhanced oil recovery project going in Cedar Hills in a horizontal field. Thank you to the innovators and the dreamers who figured out that you could drill the Red River B horizontal and make an oil play that wouldn't work with vertical wells, work with horizontal wells. Now they're working on how do we apply that knowledge to some place in an unconventional rock that we not only have to drill horizontal, but we have to hydraulically fracture. We've got 4 pilot projects currently in operation, and they were talked about yesterday. East Tioga, Big Butte, East Fork, and Lost Bridge. Millions, hundreds of millions of dollars are being invested in breaking through that terminal decline number. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage, if we use produced gas, we think we can process about 10% of the Bakken resource. If we add North Dakota carbon dioxide to that, we can get to about 1/4 of it. So that leaves 3/4 of the Bakken unprocessed unless we solve another problem, and that's the import of carbon dioxide. And we've been talking a lot about that. But what does enhanced oil recovery mean as a path forward? It means 2 more generations of North Dakotans get to enjoy the benefits of 1.4 million barrels of oil a day. 2 generations. 40 years of processing the Bakken in order to produce that next 10 billion barrels of oil out of enhanced oil recovery and carbon storage. So I want to show you a couple of different pictures of a path forward. One of them on the right-hand side there for you goes in reverse. On the other side, we're in 3rd and 4th gear. Look at what North Dakota envisions. The vision of people who created this astounds me. We have regulatory primacy over the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Air Act, Quad O, every class of UIC well that exists on the planet. You've created the Clean Sustainable Energy Authority, the EERC, the Oil and Gas Research Program, the Lignite Research Program, Renewable Energy Program, the State Energy Research Center for blue sky research projects. You created the Pipeline Authority, Transmission Authority. You're spending money to come up with underground storage of energy, carbon storage education, lignite, oil and gas litigation, hydrogen development, and on the national scale, you're part of the Energy Council, the Groundwater Protection Council, and the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. At the same time that you've done that, the left-hand side of that slide has been created by our federal administration. Executive Order 14008, signed the second day of President Biden's administration, said, I want every federal agency to find a way to stop the fossil fuel industry. And virtually every federal agency has worked on that, and you saw Senator Kramer's slide. The rules are pouring out like a fire hose coming out of Washington, D.C. First they paused, and then they slowed down leasing. We've got a North Dakota Resource Management Plan, the only state that's undergoing a BLM resource management plan. They've got a conservation and landscape rule they've released, a mineral leasing rule they've released, a waste prevention rule they've released. They're working on a travel management plan because they don't want roads in western North Dakota. The EPA has gone after methane with a waste emission charge and a Subpart W reporting rule and a greenhouse gas rule. The Corps of Engineers, as you heard Governor Burgum talk about, and he'll probably talk about later, for the first time ever is doing an EIS of an existing pipeline that's been operating for 7 years. Never happened in the history of our country. The Fish and Wildlife Service is redoing the Endangered Species Act, which may be the worst of the lot, and WOTUS 2.0 is up for grabs. And so at the same time that you, over the last decade, have created one progressive, forward-looking, positive, optimistic policy on top of another, the federal government has been piling up layer after layer after layer of blockage and stoppage. It looks kind of like this. If North Dakota could have its way, we'd be running laps, wouldn't we? But the federal government wants to slam on the brakes and push you into the wall. The road is closed, we're doing detours, and we don't want you here. So thank goodness our legislature has funded the Industrial Commission and the Ag Commission and the Attorney General to take on this fight and to work through special attorneys general to take on the federal government. Because most of these new rules don't even comply with the federal laws. But the only way to stop them, since you have an administration that does not care if they're complying with the law, the only way to stop them is through the courts. And you have to stop the rule from going into effect with a preliminary injunction, or the rule goes into effect and during the 7 years that you litigate it, it destroys capital investment and it destroys the industry that it set out to destroy in the first place. So it's not enough just to litigate the rule. You have to stop it from going into effect and then litigate the rule. And it's just as hard to work and just as expensive to undo the bad rules as it was to fight them from going into place in the first place. But it's not just on a federal scale. Unfortunately, within our state and some of our local communities, we've seen something develop that I call NIMBY and NOPE, okay? We have seen a coalition of people from political subdivisions, from the far right, from the far left, and the NGOs that has created something called NIMBY and NOPE. What you see up there is a couple of maps. Now, the NOPEs are typically the far left and the NGOs. What does NOPE mean? Not on planet Earth. Not just not in North Dakota, but not on planet Earth. They don't want to see it anywhere. What does NIMBY mean? Not in my backyard. And so we've seen North Dakota communities start to answer to the angry folks, the minority, the people who are loud, but they're in the minority. And they've staked out and said, you know what, I don't want any of this prosperity and all this infrastructure in my backyard. I want it to be at least 25 miles from my city limits. Or maybe I'll be kind and put it 10 miles from my city limits so that it's not my problem. It's not in my backyard. And so the two maps that you see of North Dakota show you what the NIMBY has in store for you. Don't build anything anywhere in North Dakota except a couple of small little slices out there in the Netherlands, which, by the way, are mostly controlled by the federal government and fall into the NOPE category. So we can't rest on what we've done. We can't rest on the problems that you've solved, because on a federal and a national, a state and a local scale, we've got a fight on our hands. But I am optimistic about your future because you are problem solvers. So what does the path forward look like? Well, it's not straight, I can promise you that. You know, I know Justin builds those beautiful, nice, smooth curves, but the path forward doesn't look anything like that. You know, every once in a while you try an innovation and it goes sideways, doesn't it? Yeah. And so you can envision the people that were going to create this path up through the woods, and they came across a couple of problems that just wouldn't get out of the way. So they found a way around them. And sometimes you got to go sideways before you can go forward. So the path forward is not, none of us knows what's coming tomorrow. None of us knows if there's another pandemic or a black swan or a price war or something crazy that happens somewhere around the world or something based on NIMBY and NOPE that's going to get in our way. What we do know is you're problem solvers. You figured out fracking. You figured out shrinking your footprint through multi-well pads. You figured out gas capture. You figured out oil by rail. You figured out the export ban. You figured out big oil pipelines. And you will figure out how to import carbon dioxide so that you can supply oil to the next 2 generations. Now, a little message to my successor. Get out of the way. Stay out of the way. So you can see how I view the role of regulation. It's a necessary evil, and I are a bureaucrat, and I've lived, it's amazing to me, 73 years we produced oil in North Dakota, and a third of that I've had the opportunity to be your oil and gas regulator. That's mind-boggling to me. My view of regulation is you stay off the path. You allow the innovation. You allow the entrepreneurs to come up with the new ideas. You allow them to go sideways and forward and sometimes back up and take another run at it. And you stay over there and you just keep them out of the weeds and keep them out of the trees. And so I was asked, and I'll repeat it again, what would my single message be to my successor for the path forward? And I'll give you the long version first and then the short version. Single message: capital will flow to where there is profit, and capital will flee where there is too much risk. And regulators can create a lot of risk. And so if this person that takes over my job will go to work every day, now here's the short version, if they will go to work every day thinking the oil and gas industry has to make money, then they will make the right decision that day. And they will allow you to innovate and create a path forward that sometimes goes backwards and sideways and up and down, but it will be a path forward for this state that I love so much. Thank you for what you've done for my home. I like this picture. It's a sunset for my career. It's a sunrise for North Dakota. Thank you for what you've done. You are amazing, awesome people. As I've said it before, you are the best in the best industry, in the best country on the planet, in the best state, in the best country on the planet. Thank you very much.
Lynn, hang on a minute. So I'm sitting back there feeling bad for myself. Look at this. You filled the room 2 times at this conference. I've had this job for just about 25 years, and I can't imagine how many times I've introduced Lynn Helms. And every event I've held, every agenda I've filled, everywhere we've been, Lynn and Kathy and I have been to every gymnasium and every bar and everywhere that you could go talk about the Bakken. You know, you bring him and Kathy Nessa with you, people are going to learn. And I've sat and listened to Lynn, just like all of you have, for all those times, and he's always driving forward. So, Lynn, my friend, I'm feeling great for you and bad for me today, and because I got to start building agendas without you as person number 1 on my list. But thank you.